What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 7 of The Power of Bold. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to The Power of Bold. I'm your host, Adam Pasquarella, and I'm glad that you're with me on this journey as we explore risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. It's been quite a ride so far, and as I said in the beginning, this podcast is an experiment, so I appreciate all the feedback that I've received from all of you. Going forward, I may change things up a bit, so thank you for your patience. Now, just as a quick recap, the last episode focused on how to develop startup ideas. For some people, this is intuitive, and for others, it's more complicated. I try to focus on the process developed by Paul Graham, who's one of the major thinkers about startups in Silicon Valley. And as he says, the baseline for great startup ideas is something that the founders want, something they can build, and something that few others realize are worth doing. I also added my own unique spin by talking about a couple filters that I use in this process. I'm inherently interested in this stuff, and I've thought about it for quite some time. The bottom line is that whatever your idea is, you have to get out of your head and the building where you're at. And this is what renowned entrepreneur and investor Steve Blank says. You need to get outside the building and talk to your customers. You must test your idea in the marketplace. Your initial idea is probably wrong, but through customer feedback, you'll get to an idea that the market really wants. That's just a very, very brief summary of the last episode, and if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to download it. So before we get into the meat of this episode, I'd like to briefly talk about what I'm currently doing. I'm starting an experiment, which is a news company that I've called Suspend the Rules. Suspend the Rules is focused on reinventing the idea of so-called talking points, which are prolific in politics these days. I've observed that so much of the discussion about the news is based on emotion and feeling. And it's the goal of my new company to arm you with facts as you discuss and debate the news with your friends, family, and colleagues. Essentially, what I really want to do is separate the signal from the noise. And I have a few tricks up my sleeve to help my readers remember my new company's talking points. And I really hope they take advantage as they read my content. I'm starting out with a simple newsletter that I'll deliver to my readers about 5 times a week, but I have a much bigger vision of where I want the company to be. Basically, if I had to sum up my company's value proposition, it would be 3 words: talking points reinvented. As for the name itself, in parliamentary procedure, suspending the rules is a way for a legislature to temporarily void certain rules for a particular purpose. And in my opinion, the current rules of media are based on clickbait and conformity with some preconceived agenda or narrative. The goal of my company is to suspend those rules. While I can't promise that I'll be perfect, I aspire to deliver the best information and analysis so that you can impress others at home, the office, or even at the bar. So that's where I'm currently at in my journey. I'm really excited to be trying out this experiment, and I'll definitely update you all on how it goes, whether good or bad. In the meantime, if you'd like to subscribe to my company's briefings, I'd encourage you to visit suspendtherules.com and add your name to the waitlist. Okay, with that said, I want to spend this episode focusing on a book that I found useful when starting my company. The book is Contagious by Jonah Berger. If I had to characterize it, I would say it's a marketing book, but I think it's useful regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur working on starting up your own company, or an employee of a business who is working to spread the word about an existing product, or even a new product that you're proposing to your boss. With that said, let's jump into the book review. I'm always interested in reading books that will help me learn about the foundational elements of building a business. As I mentioned in the last episode, I spend a lot of time thinking about startup ideas. But beyond that, I've read a good number of books on sales, marketing, product, and team building. I plan on reviewing some of these books in later episodes, especially books like Competing Against Luck by Clay Christensen and Influence by Robert Cialdini. But I want to focus on one book this week that really caught my eye. It's one that's not entirely recent, but I found it extremely helpful when thinking about why certain products catch the public consciousness more than others. And as I mentioned, the book is called Contagious, and it's by Jonah Berger. First, here's a little about Jonah Berger himself. He's a marketing professor at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. He's most known for this book, Contagious, but he's also written another recent book called Invisible Influence: The Hidden Forces That Shape Behavior. According to his bio, he spent over 15 years studying how social influence works and how it drives products and ideas to catch on. He's published dozens of articles in top-tier academic journals and consulted for a variety of Fortune 500 companies. Now, with that baseline, the subtitle of Contagious is Why Things Catch On. The book includes much of the research that Berger completed at Wharton and the insights he learned while teaching a class on the same subject. Berger mentions that the most famous book in this genre is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, and there are more recent books out there that touch on this subject. Most notably, I'm thinking of the book Hitmakers by Atlantic editor Derek Thompson. These are all good books, but I like Berger's book because he really provides some actionable insights for those who want to make their products or services more contagious. It's a pretty easy read. It's only about 210 pages, and you could really finish it in a couple days. Essentially, the thesis of Berger's book is that the most popular products, services, or ideas are generated via word of mouth, and that in order to do that, there are 6 principles of contagiousness that you can apply. And so the book is separated out into 6 chapters that talk about each of these principles. The principles are separated out into an acronym, STEPS, S-T-E-P-P-S, so that we can remember it as 6 key steps to contagiousness. Those steps are, first, social currency, second, triggers, third, emotion, fourth, public, fifth, practical value, and sixth, stories. So in the remainder of this podcast, I'm going to briefly speak about these principles and deliver some actionable insights so that you can work to incorporate some of these principles into your product or service. So let's dive into the book. Before talking about Berger's 6 steps, I want to speak about his introduction, which is titled Why Things Catch On. He first floats the idea that some products, ideas, or services may catch on because they're simply better, or certain products or services have more attractive pricing than others. He also says that advertising is probably another factor. A 2016 report showed that the global advertising market is estimated at around $532 billion. But with all that said, he says that word of mouth is a much more important factor. In fact, he argues that word of mouth is the primary factor between 20 to 50% of all purchasing decisions. He thinks word of mouth is more effective than traditional advertising for 2 key reasons. First, it's more persuasive. Ads usually tell us how great a product is, but friends tell it straight. They're much more candid. And second, word of mouth is more targeted. It's naturally directed towards an interested audience. So it's the goal of an entrepreneur or company to generate word of mouth. And while many assume that this has to happen online, Berger mentions research by the Keller-Fay Group, which says that only 7% of word of mouth happens online. Offline word of mouth is arguably more important than online word of mouth, even though social media, trending topics, and online virality generate more headlines. With this baseline, Berger says that the goal of marketers is to generate word of mouth. Online and offline word of mouth are not mutually exclusive, but perhaps many marketers underrate the power of offline word of mouth. And with that said, he then transitions into the first of the 6 steps to make products more contagious. That first principle is social currency, the first S. Now, I think this is the best chapter in the book. It just intuitively makes sense. In its most basic form, social currency is the idea that people like appearing smart, rich, and cool, rather than dumb, poor, or geeky. If your product or service appeals to these positive aspirations instead of negative ones, customers are more likely to talk about your product, services, or ideas. To illustrate this, Berger talks about the speakeasy called Please Don't Tell, also known as PDT, in New York City. I've been to this bar, and I have to say that I was more inclined to talk about it and share my experience with family and friends. This is because of the way that PDT is designed. You enter the bar through a phone booth in a hot dog restaurant called Criff Dogs, which is conveniently owned by the same people as PDT. No signs are posted at the entrance. There are no ads and billboards or magazines. Yet PDT is one of the most sought-after drink reservations in New York City. Spots are first come, first served, and reservations, booked only through phone, fill extremely quickly. And above all, the cocktails are terrific. PDT was designed to mint social currency among its customers. After the experience, its customers are naturally inclined to share their thoughts with friends and family, which ramps up even more demand and notoriety for PDT. People like to talk about themselves, and they're more than happy to show how cool they are by describing their time at a speakeasy like PDT. Berger says that there are 3 ways to give people a way to make themselves look good while promoting products and ideas along the way. And those are inner remarkability, game mechanics, and making people feel like insiders. Remarkable things provide social currency because they make people who talk about them seem more remarkable. Sharing things like trivia on the bottom of Snapple bottle caps makes us seem more engaging and more fun to talk to. Berger says the key to finding inner remarkability is to think about what makes something interesting, surprising, or novel. Mysteries and controversies are also remarkable, and he uses the example of the Blair Witch Project as one way to generate buzz, as moviegoers didn't know if the film was fake or not. As far as game mechanics, Berger connects frequent flyer miles with social currency, stating that game mechanics within frequent flyer programs make customers want to reach the next level so that they can show off their premier status to family and friends. Game mechanics motivate us on an interpersonal level by encouraging social comparison. Essentially, he argues that people don't just care about how they are doing, they care about their performance in relation to others. Finally, he argues that making people feel like insiders mints social currency. PDT is a great example of this, and he also argues that invitation online websites like Guilt Group leverage this idea as well. A membership-only model makes site members feel like insiders, and just like a busy nightclub with a wait outside, people assume that the website or nightclub is desirable. Scarcity and exclusivity boost word of mouth by making people feel like insiders. Okay, next we're going to talk about the second of the 6 steps. That is triggers. Berger argues that some people talk about certain products more than others because of the way that they are triggered when going about their day-to-day life. At the beginning of the chapter, he asks readers whether they think Disney World or Honey Nut Cheerios gets more word of mouth. While most people assume that it's Disney World, the actual answer is Honey Nut Cheerios. This is confirmed by research, since Honey Nut Cheerios are more often encountered in people's day-to-day lives. Berger discovered that instead of focusing on whether certain aspects matter to generating word of mouth, we also need to look at when they matter. And in fact, quote-unquote interesting products do not sustain high levels of word of mouth activity over time. His thesis is that stimuli in your surrounding environment also determine which thoughts and ideas are top of mind. Studies have shown that when shopping for groceries, more customers buy French wine when French music is playing, and German wine when German music is playing. As another example, in 1997, when NASA's Pathfinder mission reached Mars, the candy company Mars noticed an unexpected uptick in the sale of its Mars bar. My favorite example, though, is when Berger talks about the notorious song Friday by Rebecca Black. Friday was one of the most popular songs in 2011, and by looking at the number of daily searches for Rebecca Black on YouTube in March 2011, Berger discovered that spikes happened once every week on, you guessed it, Fridays. Even though the song was terrible, people were triggered to YouTube the video at the end of the work week. So when marketing your product, you should associate it with triggers that your customers encounter throughout their days. In an ideal world, when encountering that trigger, they'll think of your product. A strong trigger can be much more effective than a catchy slogan. One key factor is how frequently the stimulus occurs. Burger uses the example of Michelob beer, which initially had the slogan, "Holidays are made for Michelob." However, when the company changed the slogan to "Weekends are made for Michelob," they were much more successful. Also, another factor is how strong the link is. A forced association isn't going to be as effective. You'll be much more successful if the trigger and your product naturally associate. And as an example, like I said, weekends and drinking beer, and that was the Michelob case study. So to sum up, Burger argues that we need to consider context when marketing our products. Top of the mind means tip of the tongue. The third part of steps is emotion. And Burger's thesis is that when we care, we share. Naturally contagious content usually evokes some sort of emotion. Some of these high arousal emotions are awe, excitement, anger, and anxiety. By studying the most emailed list on the New York Times website, Burger discovered that science articles made the list more than politics, fashion, or business news. He found this really curious. When thinking about why this is, he discovered that scientific innovations and discoveries evoke awe in readers. Awe is the sense of wonder and amazement that occurs when someone is inspired by great knowledge, beauty, or might. According to his research, awe-inspiring articles were 30% more likely to make the most emailed list. And to illustrate this phenomenon, he talks about the well-known Susan Boyle appearance on Britain's Got Talent, and I'm sure you've seen the video. Burger also concluded that sadness had the opposite effect. Sad articles were 16% less likely to make the most emailed list. By contrast, positive stories, like stories about newcomers falling in love in New York City, were 13% more likely to make the list than sadder stories. Surprisingly, however, stories about anger and anxiety led even more people to share. He argues that emotions like anger and anxiety are high arousal, while sadness is less arousing. High arousal emotions are more likely to be shared. And as an example of this, he uses the example of the United Breaks Guitars viral video in 2009. The video, while funny, mostly went viral because people were angry about how their bags are handled by United Airlines employees. Ultimately, Burger argues that high arousal emotions can drive people to action and to discuss your product. On the positive side, you should excite or inspire people by showing how they can make a difference. On the negative side, make people mad, not sad. Now let's talk about the fourth part of steps, and that is the first P, which stands for public. The thesis is that seeing others do something makes people more likely to do it themselves. Burger starts the chapter by speaking about Steve Jobs and how he wanted the Apple logo to look right to the rest of the world when a laptop is in use in a coffee shop or other public place. When you have a Mac laptop, the Apple logo looks the opposite to you, the user, but looks correct to the outside world, making the Apple logo more public. Essentially, making things more observable makes them easier to imitate, which makes them more likely to become popular. People imitate others because others' choices provide information. I really liked Burger's example that if you're in a foreign city, you're more likely to go to a restaurant where there are more people compared to a less crowded restaurant. It intuitively makes sense. Social proof is a real thing. Seeing a long line in front of a food truck at the Halal Guys in New York City, for example, makes you assume that the longer the line, the better the food is. Observability plays a huge impact on whether products or ideas catch on. Observable things are more likely to be discussed and more likely to spur purchase and action. So the goal is to make your product or service or idea more observable. This can be done in a variety of ways, but one of his best examples is the yearly Movember event, where men grow mustaches in November to raise awareness for prostate cancer. It starts a conversation and makes people more likely to learn about, and even donate, to organizations working to combat prostate cancer. Burger also mentions Hotmail.com, and this is a very well-known example in Silicon Valley. In the early 1990s, when Hotmail was getting off the ground, Hotmail users would have a message appended to each email that they sent. The message basically said, get your private free email from Hotmail at www.hotmail.com. So every time current Hotmail customers sent an email, they also sent prospective customers a bit of social proof, which was an implicit endorsement for the, at the time, unknown service. This was a pretty innovative tactic, which led to huge growth for Hotmail. So for this fourth step, Berger argues that to get products, services, or ideas to become more popular, we need to make them more publicly observable. And you can do this whether the product is naturally popular or not. Even better, you should try to design products or services that can advertise themselves. So with that said, we're going to move on to the fifth part of steps, the second P, which stands for practical value. People will spread the word about something if it helps them save time, improve health, or save money. Having said that, we need to highlight the incredible value that we provide, monetarily or otherwise, and need to package the knowledge or expertise so that people can easily pass it on. While practical value may not be the sexiest concept, it isn't inconsequential. Sharing something useful with others is a quick and easy way to help them out, and this can occur over the internet or across distances, or in a conversation with your neighbor. Also, Berger argues that passing along useful things strengthens social bonds and solidifies friendships. While social currency is about the speaker and how it makes them look, practical value is about the listener, helping them save time or money, or helping them have good experiences. Now, I didn't get as much from this chapter compared to other chapters, but a key idea that you're going to emphasize in this principle is providing and highlighting incredible value. The way you present practical value is important as well, and Berger goes into psychological concepts to explain this point. Basically, the main thing to remember is that practical value is about helping the listener. Berger recommends that thinking about how people gravitate to our product, service, or idea in the first place will give us a good sense of the underlying practical value. The harder part, however, is cutting through the clutter. At long last, we've arrived at the final letter of steps. The final S stands for stories. We should be asking ourselves how to wrap up our idea, product, or service in a broader narrative. People don't just share information, they tell stories. So we need to essentially build our own Trojan horses, embedding our products, ideas, and services in stories that people want to tell. The narrative, in fact, can be the wrapper for social currency, emotion, or practical value. The bottom line is that ordinary stories we tell each other every day carry information. They provide a quick and easy way for us to acquire lots of knowledge in a vivid and engaging fashion. These stories save time and hassle and give us the information we need in a way that's easy to remember. They essentially provide proof by analogy. Now, one case study that immediately comes to mind is Tom's Shoes. The founder, Blake Mycoskie, started Tom's Shoes by discovering that many children lacked proper footwear in South America. Tom's Shoes is known for many things, but I think it's well known for its 1-for-1 campaign, where the company promises to donate one pair of shoes for every pair sold. When you're wearing Tom's Shoes, the story naturally flows out when people ask you about your footwear. And by telling the story, you're also minting some social currency for yourself. This 1-for-1 model has been adopted by other startups, I'm thinking of Warby Parker, and it provides a really good way to not only do good in the world, but also to market your product. Berger basically says that we need to build our own Trojan horses. The content needs to be related to the product that we're selling, and it needs to be valuable. Valuable virality is what really matters in the story. Essentially, make the idea or desired benefit a key part of the narrative. So I tried to summarize many of the important points and insights I learned from the book. It's a quick read, like I said, it's about 200 pages. And the bottom line is that we can use some or all of the 6 steps to make our products, services, or ideas more contagious. I'd encourage you to read the full book to get the entire gist of Berger's thesis. But if you're pressed for time, or just want a cheat sheet on the 6 steps, he provides a useful chart on questions that you should ask yourself to maximize the number of steps that you can apply to your product. I'll provide a link to this chart in the show notes. If you have a product, service, or idea, and whether you've started a business or are still at your job, I'd seriously recommend that you pick up this book. Now, when thinking about the book in relation to your product, service, or idea, you don't necessarily have to apply all 6 steps. Any combination of the 6 is going to at least somewhat improve word of mouth about your product, idea, or service. But I think that the more that you can include, the better. As I've been discovering since I left my job, it's pretty difficult to distinguish your product, service, or idea from others. The marketplace is competitive. But I firmly believe that if you can embrace some of Berger's tactics, the odds have increased that your product, idea, or service will become more popular. This is regardless of how quote-unquote boring or uninteresting your industry is. In fact, that's more of a reason for embracing some of Berger's tactics. Now, I'm curious what all of you think about the book and Berger's strategies. Feel free to get in touch with me on the Power of Bold's Facebook or Twitter pages. The bottom line is that this is one of my favorite marketing books out there. It's a quick read and can provide some useful insights as you go about spreading the word about your product, idea, or service. I highly recommend that you all check it out. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Power of Bold. You can find the show notes on thepowerofbold.com. And if you want to chat, get in touch with me on social media. All of those links are on my website. You can also email me at adam@thepowerofbold.com. And if possible, I'd greatly appreciate if you can leave a review of the podcast on iTunes. Thanks again, guys, and see you next episode.